This is where Marilyn Monroe was laid to rest over a half-century ago. Back behind these gates and around the corner. Back then in 1962, people came from all over.
New evidence linked to Marilyn Monroe's death has resurfaced, forcing people to reconsider the official story that has stood for decades. For years, her passing was explained as a tragic overdose, but newly uncovered details involving missing records, private communications, and conflicting timelines are now casting serious doubt on what really happened. While these findings seem to solve parts of the mystery, they also open up darker and more unsettling questions about her final days. What really happened to Marilyn Monroe in 1962? Marilyn Monroe's death is one of those stories that refuses to fade with time. Even after decades have passed, it continues to spark debate, suspicion, and unanswered questions. She wasn't just a film star, she was a global symbol of beauty, emotion, and mystery. So when she was found dead in her Los Angeles home in 1962, the world didn't just mourn her, it questioned everything. The official explanation came quickly. Authorities labeled her death as a probable overdose, suggesting it may have been self-inflicted. But from the very beginning, the story felt incomplete to many people. The speed of the conclusion, combined with the strange circumstances surrounding her final hours, left room for doubt. As time went on, more theories began to surface. Some believed Marilyn had become too close to powerful individuals and may have learned things that put her in danger. Others pointed toward political connections and suggested her situation was far more complicated than what was publicly admitted. Even with multiple investigations, documentaries, and renewed attention over the years, no version of events fully settled the controversy. One of the biggest concerns raised by researchers was how quickly the case was closed without deeper public clarity. People close to Marilyn later pointed out inconsistencies in statements, unclear timelines, and missing or unexplained details from the investigation. Certain pieces of evidence simply never seemed to align properly, and that gap fueled even more suspicion. Because of this, Marilyn's story slowly shifted in public perception. She was no longer viewed only as a tragic Hollywood figure, but also as someone possibly connected to deeper layers of secrecy involving politics and influence. While none of these claims were ever definitively proven, they kept her case alive in public discussion. But the real question is not just what happened in 1962, it's how someone like Marilyn Monroe ended up in that position in the first place. Before the fame, before Hollywood, she was born as Norma Jean Mortensen in Los Angeles. Her early life was unstable from the start. With no confirmed father and a mother struggling with mental illness, she grew up without the security most children take for granted. Much of her childhood was spent moving between foster homes and temporary care. Those years shaped her deeply. They influenced how she saw love, trust, and identity. They also planted emotional wounds that would follow her into adulthood, long before the world ever knew her as Marilyn Monroe. And as her life moved forward, those early struggles would become the foundation of a transformation that changed everything, leading to a fame-filled life that would eventually end in one of Hollywood's most controversial deaths. But to understand how things spiraled into mystery, we first need to look at how Norma Jean began turning into Marilyn Monroe. The transformation that created a Hollywood icon. By the time she reached her mid-teens, Norma Jean's life was already moving toward a turning point she could not avoid. In 1942, at just 16 years old, she made a decision that would change the course of her entire future. She married James Doherty, a young neighbor who was a few years older than her. But this wasn't a story of young love or romance. It was a decision driven by fear and survival. Her foster care situation was ending, and returning to unstable living conditions or an orphanage felt like stepping back into uncertainty. Marriage to her wasn't about love. It was about safety. It was a way to escape a system that had already failed her too many times. When James later joined the Merchant Marine during World War II, Norma Jean was left on her own in California. To support herself, she eventually took a job in a wartime factory in 1944, helping produce equipment used for military efforts. It was there, in a completely ordinary setting, that something unexpected happened. A military photographer visited the factory to document workers contributing to the war effort. When he noticed her, he asked if she would pose for a few photographs. Those images, simple at first, ended up changing everything. Her presence in front of the camera stood out immediately, not just because of her looks, but because of a natural confidence and charm that couldn't be ignored. Those photos led to modeling opportunities. Soon after, she signed with a modeling agency, and her rise began quietly but quickly. She appeared in magazines, calendars, and pin-up features, slowly gaining attention across the country. For the first time, she wasn't just surviving, she was being seen. By 1946, her growing popularity opened another door. She signed a contract with 20th Century Fox, marking her official entry into Hollywood. But with that opportunity came a major change. Studio executives decided her name needed something more marketable, more memorable, more star-like. That's when Norma Jean Mortensen disappeared from credits and Marilyn Monroe was born. The name Marilyn was inspired by actress Marilyn Miller, while Monroe came from her mother's maiden name. It was a reinvention designed for Hollywood success. But emotionally, it created a divide inside her. One identity belonged to the public, the other still belonged to the girl she used to be. At first, her roles were small and uncredited, but they gave her exposure. By the late 1940s, she started appearing in minor film parts, slowly building recognition. One of her earliest credited appearances came in Dangerous Years in 1947, where she played a small role as a waitress. Even though the film wasn't a major success, it marked the beginning of something bigger. She was no longer just modeling, she was acting, learning, and adapting to the Hollywood system. By the start of the new decade, Marilyn Monroe was no longer an unknown name. She was becoming a rising presence in Hollywood, carefully shaping the image the world would come to recognize. But as her star began to rise, so did the emotional pressure behind the image. And what she would face next would slowly reveal a much darker side of fame. The dark side of Marilyn Monroe's fame. Even as Marilyn Monroe's career began to rise, the emotional weight of her past never truly left her. The childhood she had lived through, filled with instability, foster homes, and emotional abandonment, stayed buried beneath her growing fame. But inside, those wounds were still very much alive. As she stepped deeper into Hollywood, the pressure only intensified. To the public, she looked like the perfect image of confidence and beauty. But behind that image, she struggled with anxiety, depression, and a constant fear of not being enough. The world saw Marilyn Monroe. Few ever saw the vulnerable woman behind her. Over time, she began relying on prescription medication to help her sleep and manage her emotions. What started as occasional use slowly turned into dependency. The long filming hours, constant criticism, and lack of privacy only made things worse. She was no longer just performing on screen. She was performing in real life too, hiding pain behind every smile. Hollywood, however, had already placed her into a specific mold. She was marketed as the blonde bombshell, a role that brought her fame but limited her depth as an actress. While she wanted serious acting opportunities, she was often given roles that reduced her to a stereotype. It frustrated her deeply. She knew she was capable of more, but the industry didn't always agree. This tension eventually led her to push back. She began refusing roles she felt were degrading, demanding better scripts and fairer treatment. These decisions created conflict with studios and producers, and she quickly gained a reputation for being difficult. But in reality, she was trying to take control of her own identity. Her personal life only added to the emotional strain. Her marriages, which began with hope, all ended in heartbreak. She searched for stability and love, but repeatedly found disappointment instead. One of her most public relationships with baseball star Joe DiMaggio quickly turned turbulent, marked by jealousy and emotional control, eventually ending after less than a year. By this point, Marilyn was caught between two worlds, Hollywood's expectations and her own emotional collapse. The more famous she became, the more isolated she felt. And as her life became more unstable behind the scenes, new rumors and powerful connections began forming around her, setting the stage for a much deeper and more dangerous mystery in Hollywood. What new clues reveal about Marilyn's final circle? As Marilyn Monroe's fame reached its peak, her life became increasingly surrounded by powerful names, secretive encounters, and growing speculation. Behind the glamour, a different story was quietly forming, one filled with unanswered questions and hidden connections that would later fuel decades of controversy. Reports and later documentaries suggested that Marilyn had been connected to influential political figures, including the Kennedy brothers. These connections were never officially confirmed in detail during her lifetime, but rumors continued to circulate, especially after she was seen attending private gatherings hosted by close associates of the political elite. According to various accounts, Marilyn's interactions with these powerful figures were more than casual meetings. Some insiders claimed she believed she had developed personal trust with them, while others suggested she was simply caught in a world far bigger and more dangerous than she realized. At the same time, concerns began to grow within political circles. Some individuals reportedly feared that private conversations or personal involvement could become public knowledge. This created tension, especially as Marilyn's emotional state became more unstable in her final years. Investigators and researchers later pointed to unusual behavior around her final months: missed appointments, emotional instability, and increasing isolation. While none of these details alone confirmed anything unusual, together they painted a picture that raised more questions than answers. One of the most disturbing elements that emerged later was the suggestion that surveillance and private monitoring may have taken place around people in her circle. Whether true or not, these claims added another layer of secrecy to an already complicated story. By this point, Marilyn Monroe was no longer just a Hollywood icon struggling with fame. She had become the center of rumors, political speculation, and unanswered mysteries that extended far beyond the film industry. And just when it seemed the story couldn't get more complicated, new accounts from her final days began to surface, revealing details that changed the entire direction of the investigation. Marilyn Monroe's final weekend of mystery. In the final stretch of Marilyn Monroe's life, those closest to her began noticing a clear shift in her behavior. The once vibrant public figure was now increasingly emotional, unstable, and overwhelmed by the weight of her personal struggles and the growing pressure surrounding her connections and reputation. One of the people who remained concerned about her during this time was Frank Sinatra. He was not just a fellow celebrity, but someone who had shared a long-standing friendship with Marilyn. Over time, he reportedly began to suspect that her situation was far more complicated than what the public was being told. Marilyn's emotional state during her final days appeared fragile. According to accounts from people around her, she experienced intense mood swings. Moments of laughter and charm followed quickly by deep sadness and isolation. She was also reportedly consuming a mix of prescription medication and alcohol more frequently, which raised concerns among her close circle. During this period, she spent time at the Cal Neva Lodge, a resort linked to Frank Sinatra. It was meant to be a quiet escape, but instead it became one of the last known places where she was seen in a vulnerable state. Witnesses described her as emotionally exhausted, often speaking about feeling abandoned and confused about the relationships in her life. Frank Sinatra, noticing her condition, allegedly intervened at one point when her behavior became alarming. Concerned for her safety, he attempted to calm her down and keep her awake, fearing she might harm herself unintentionally. Those moments would later become part of the many accounts surrounding her final days. At the same time, there were growing whispers that Marilyn felt pressured, watched, and emotionally cornered by the people she once trusted. Whether fact or rumor, these claims added to the already heavy cloud of mystery forming around her name. By the time she left Cal Neva, Marilyn Monroe was no longer just dealing with fame or heartbreak. She was surrounded by confusion, emotional exhaustion, and unanswered questions. And only days later, the situation would take a turn that would permanently seal her fate in Hollywood history, leading investigators into even darker and more controversial theories. Frank Sinatra's theory about Marilyn Monroe. After Marilyn Monroe's death, speculation intensified. with Frank Sinatra offering a widely discussed view. As a close friend, he reportedly questioned the official account and considered a more troubling possibility. According to accounts, he believed she may have been involved in sensitive situations and planned to reveal private matters linked to powerful figures, a theory that fueled ongoing debate. Sinatra also allegedly heard claims from associates that Monroe's passing may not have been accidental. Some accounts suggested that certain individuals feared she might reveal information that could cause serious political and public damage. These rumors created a narrative that extended far beyond Hollywood gossip and into the world of politics and influence. Further complicating the story were suggestions of involvement from people connected to organized crime, as well as political figures who may have had indirect ties to Monroe's personal life. Sinatra, according to these reports, believed that multiple forces could have intersected around her at the same time, creating a situation that ultimately turned tragic. However, it's important to note that none of these theories were ever officially proven. Much of what was later discussed came from second-hand accounts, leaked conversations, and retrospective interpretations of events that were never fully verified. Still, Sinatra's perspective added a powerful layer to the mystery. It reinforced the idea that Marilyn Monroe's death might not be as straightforward as originally presented, and that important pieces of the story could still be missing. And as more private accounts and hidden correspondence began to surface years later, investigators would stumble upon something even more personal, something that seemed to reveal Marilyn's own voice in the middle of the mystery. The hidden letters that changed everything. In recent years, private correspondence allegedly linked to Marilyn Monroe and John F. Kennedy resurfaced, adding a new layer to the long-standing mystery. These letters, which were never meant for public eyes, offered a rare glimpse into a relationship that had long been surrounded by rumors, but rarely confirmed with direct evidence. One letter, dated February 13, 1962, reportedly showed Kennedy expressing personal affection toward Marilyn, describing moments and details that suggested a deeper emotional connection than previously acknowledged. It also referenced discreet arrangements meant to keep their meetings private, reinforcing the idea that their connection had to remain hidden from public view. Marilyn's reply, dated just days later, reflected both emotional intensity and awareness of their situation. In her words, she acknowledged the secrecy surrounding their relationship while also revealing how deeply involved she felt. The tone of the message suggested both attachment and inner conflict. However, by mid-1962, the tone shifted dramatically. Later correspondence allegedly showed Marilyn expressing a desire to end the relationship, citing emotional strain and the pressure of living in secrecy. She reportedly wanted clarity, stability, and an end to hidden ties that were affecting her well-being.
Marilyn singing Happy Birthday, Mr. President in 1962 is seen as her strangely conclusive public swan song.
Kennedy's final message reportedly accepted her decision and ended their connection. These letters, though debated, became key in the Marilyn Monroe mystery, appearing to confirm long-standing public speculation. But while these letters revealed emotion and secrecy, another discovery would soon emerge, one that pointed not to love or politics, but to something missing entirely from the record. The final piece that was never found. One of the most unsettling elements in the story of Marilyn Monroe's death isn't what was found, but what was never recovered. Shortly after her passing, reports began to surface about a personal diary she had kept, one that allegedly contained her private thoughts, conversations, and experiences in the months leading up to her death. According to those familiar with her inner circle, this diary may have included details about her connections, her emotional struggles, and possibly even sensitive conversations involving influential figures. But despite its potential importance, the diary was never officially documented as evidence. It simply disappeared. This raised immediate suspicion. For many, the idea that such a personal and potentially revealing item could vanish without explanation only added to the belief that something had been intentionally removed from the story. At the same time, another figure remained notably silent: Jacqueline Kennedy. While rumors and speculation about Marilyn's connections continued to grow, she never publicly addressed them. Some believe her silence was a deliberate choice to protect her family and maintain dignity. Others think it was a way to avoid adding fuel to an already uncontrollable situation. Whatever the reason, her silence only deepened the mystery. Decades later, the case of Marilyn Monroe remains suspended between official conclusions and unanswered questions. The letters, the timelines, the missing pieces, they don't point to one clear answer, but they do suggest that the truth may be far more complex than what was originally presented. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Because after all the evidence, all the theories, and all the years, the full truth about Marilyn Monroe may still be out there, hidden, incomplete, and waiting to be uncovered. Thanks for watching. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments, and check out our next video for more untold mysteries.